We've forgotten that there's a God that we have to answer.
Dealing with people who reject truth.
I'm wondering in my mind why life is so difficult for me.
340 million people who are suffering.
Real stories.
Here's a man who's responsible for almost 7 billion people.
Real issues.
How much does peer pressure actually exist?
And real views.
Gangs exist at every level.
This is Real Talk.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome to this episode of Real Talk USA. Today, we discuss a hot topic in American society, an issue that continues to be very relevant, marriage in the current day. Marriage is a religious institution, but the state seems to have an interest in it. Now, in America, there's a separation between church and state. So why is it that marriage continues to unite those two entities? Well, today we're going to pitch these questions, as well as many, many more, to our great panelists here, as well as to our great audience. Let me start by introducing our panelists. We have, to my right, Dr. Wasim Saeed. He's traveled and he's been a part of many cultures, whether it's in England, Guatemala, or now in California. He's a theoretical physicist, and he's also a member of the National Executive Board of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, USA. Seated next to him, we have Reverend LaRue. He is the Executive Director of the Queen's Federation of Churches and a moderator of the Committee on Religious Liberty for National Council of Churches. And finally, we have Dr. Ahmad Chaudhry. He's a surgeon, a member of the New York Executive Board for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, and has a doctorate from Harvard University. Thank you guys for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marriage can be defined as a special union or contract between a man and a woman. It can be seen as a holy covenant that establishes the rights and obligations between the two spouses. People get married for many reasons, including legal, social, financial, and religious. In today's society, we see that the sanctity and value of marriage is on the decline. So what's the purpose of marriage?
Partnership for your life, the rest of your lifetime.
Oh, life is an adventure, right? Wouldn't you rather have a teammate in that adventure? A teammate you can trust, a teammate you can count on, a teammate to like balance the highs and lows. So, I found a good teammate, and now we're going through the adventure of life together as a team as opposed to alone.
The love aspect, they feel that by marrying somebody, you basically have that person's, full commitment. Something to say to themselves that, all right, this person's with me and with me alone.
To maintain the family unit.
Looking at nowadays, especially the younger generation, your generation is like, they're really putting off getting married to much later on. Why do you think that is?
Because they don't trust anyone.
Oh, okay.
We don't trust people. We don't, because people, you like get committed and then so-and-so will go somewhere else and cheat on you or anything. We don't trust people anymore, and so we wait longer and longer.
Oftentimes your professional ambitions, whether they require travel or long work hours, stand in the way of actually investing the time needed to build a relationship.
With this day and age, most people, they try to figure out their future first. Before, it wasn't as complicated as it is now. It's more so you grow up, you get married, and you live your life, and that's basically it, on a farm or something. But nowadays, everybody's trying to actually build some kind of support system, so that they won't just get married and have a child and won't be able to raise them.
People don't have the same value of it anymore. People will jump from things faster than they did back in the days. Like when my grandparents were married, they were married for a long time. But nowadays, 2 out of 5 marriages actually last more than 10 years. I think what the statistics are. Yeah. So people don't put the energy into it anymore. They can run from it before they try to fix things.
Marriage signifies that you're with the person, and that's who you decide that you want to be with. So, and that aspect, yeah. But with the rates going up so high, divorce and so on and so forth, it's kind of a toss-up. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants that one person they could be with. So, I'll personally say I think marriage is important.
Why are people putting off marriage? Is marriage even important in today's society? Join us as we explore these questions and find out people's views about marriage.
So we have quite a battle before us here. We have quite a battlefield when it comes to marriage. Why does society stress such an amount of importance on this idea of marriage?
I think when we talk about social structure, probably there is no other institution that has more to do with creating an atmosphere which is stable, which is secure, which is safe, in which this human race can continue to exist and can continue to grow, and in which people can live in peace and harmony. And this civilization, I guess, is based, I think, in large part on what we began to be taught by the Prophet Adam. When this whole dispensation started, it started with the first lesson, which was, if you want to live a life in a paradise, you have to live as a husband, wife, children, blood relatives, and so on. So I think this institution of marriage goes to the very essence of human civilization, and it's the most important institution for making sure that we have a fabric of society which is stable and safe and secure and allows us to live happily.
So you think it goes to the safety and the security of society? Reverend, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with that. I think that the essence of the family relationship, which I would say is more than merely husband, wife, and children, because the traditional family, notwithstanding what people often say today, pointing to this nuclear family as if that were through the centuries, it really is the larger family with grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins related, so that there are a lot of people to sort of pick up the pieces, absorb the shocks that might exist within any one single nuclear family. But it does go to the support and the stability of the society. Propagation of the race was a very important and necessary thing, much more so in earlier times than now, where we're facing a population explosion. But if you didn't have families, and if you didn't protect and nurture the children to grow into adulthood, you really would not have a continuation of the race in any stable way. So family was important from that standpoint. It's also important in terms of how you nurture and educate people, we talk about raising children, how you instill the moral code and fabric within each individual so that they can relate, and so the family becomes the microcosm of the larger society. So you learn to trust, you learn to behave, you learn to cooperate within family in order that you might do all of those things in the larger society.
All right, great opening remarks. And Anwar, what about you? What are your thoughts?
No, I would completely agree with the other two panelists, and I would actually just give a slightly different perspective. Certainly, the societal benefit of marriage is clearly laid out, but I would say it's also very important from an individual perspective. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said that one who marries has fulfilled half of religion. And when you ponder upon that, how can one person fulfill half of their obligations of religion through one such act? And for me, it's in marriage you live so intimately close to another person that you almost give up part of your own individuality, and you have to really structure your life in a way that will be beneficial not just to yourself. So it gets rid of that selfishness that a person who may not be married may have, and suddenly you're thrust into obligations that you have towards others. So for me, that individual aspect and the benefit of marriage is clearly there.
So marriage really tests whether the person you're showing in public is the person who you are in private. That's
absolutely. I mean, I think that honesty and that transparency is there in marriage, where every single one of your acts in private is suddenly open to another person, and there, all of that, private acts are no longer just for yourself, but together with another person. So I think it certainly makes you a better person. The act of marriage.
Now, we did a poll of the audience before the show, and there's a few who are married, but the majority who are not yet married. So far, I don't think we've said anything to scare them away from marriage, so I think we're doing all right. And of course, audience, whenever you want to jump in, whenever you have some questions or some comments, we welcome them. That's okay. Reverend, you said that it's important for the propagation of the human race. Why would we need marriage to really continue the human race forward? Couldn't we make kids without having to be married?
Well, biologically, that of course is possible. But to be able to raise them and to nurture, I mean, babies need protection. They need care. They need to be nurtured. They need to be fed. They need to be taught. And if you don't have a stable relationship in which that can happen, you're going to have a lot of wild animals running around. I mean, I think it's as simple as that.
In a breakdown of society, there's different religions. So why do we see such an emphasis on marriage through a religion?
You know, if I may, I think there is a lot more to the equation of propagation of race than just simply a question of providing a nurturing environment for the children. That is certainly one of the most important things. But within marriage, there are aspects of human life, human urges that are also tackled. You know, we talk about chaste behavior. We talk about men and women having a relationship. That is something that needs to be given a proper, what should we say, you know, doing the right thing at the right time and in an environment which is chaste. I mean, I want to use the word maybe, which is perhaps more palatable to people these days, but that is what it's all about. And I think that aspect should not be underrated.
I think the religion's interest in talking in terms of covenant relationships, I think pervades the faith in every faith. It's, to me, religion and what God's commands are all about making and supporting relationships. And as has been said, the marriage relationship is clearly the most intimate of relationships. And so it's learning how to perfect relationship is one of the opportunities that one has in a good marriage.
But why is it so important that one remains chaste or maintains their chastity before marriage, and then during marriage, why is fidelity so important?
Well, I would think that fidelity is important simply as a matter of trust. You know, a theologian of the last century, Paul Tillich, said that sin is that which breaks covenant. You know, if you look at the commandments, if you look at any of the other specific elements that have been denominated as sinful, it's because it breaches covenant, it breaks relationship. And so if you can't trust somebody in the most intimate of relationships, you know, how is that relationship going to endure? So I think fidelity is absolutely important. Probably scientifically less so with respect to premarital, but the whole idea is that you're going to hold out this most intimate encounter with another until the time that that relationship and that covenant is sealed.
This is a strange question. I mean, fidelity, you know, having to do with fulfillment of your compacts, your agreements. In everything in society, if we don't have that, you have nothing on which to stand. I mean, I remember, you know, when we read the story of the history of the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, one of the greatest testaments given in his favor was that when he claimed God had revealed to him this new faith, the first person to believe in him was his wife. And that testament, that, you know, is what we can count on today as giving us, I think, probably far greater weight than what anybody else may today be, you know, making a film about or any of the other nonsensical things. So I think truth, fidelity, fulfillment of our covenants, that goes into what we do in science, what we do as a medical doctor. I mean, can you imagine a dentist whose reputation is tainted by the fact that, you know, he cheats on something, maybe his taxes or whatever? I mean, all of this goes to making us able to function as a society in which we are interacting with other people. So fidelity is very important, and I think if you are loyal to your partner in your marriage, it speaks volumes for the neighbor who lives next to you, for the, you know, teachers that you interact with when you go to school with your children, when you go and shop, everybody.
And I think peacefulness within a society isn't simply the absence of war or conflict, but it's actually true peacefulness within one's heart. And the only way one can, you know, really obtain that is by obtaining some sort of trust of what's going on around them. And if you can have that on a one-on-one basis in the most intimate of your relationships, I think that breeds a level of trust and peacefulness within oneself. If we didn't have that and you weren't sure, jealousy is one of the most rampant and strong emotions that we have, built into ourselves. And I think, lack of fidelity simply breeds jealousy. And, that just destroys the peacefulness that one might have in their heart.
So when you're in a committed relationship, you are able to be more at peace with yourself as a result? It's better for your psyche, perhaps?
I think that's so. I really do. I think that you're able to have that sense of integrity because if you're no longer having to worry about the loyalty or the faithfulness of a partner, it takes away a lot of negative vibrations.
If I may add to this, the concept of marriage in Islam and what the Prophet taught us, one of the sayings that always impressed me about what he said, when he used to go out on a journey and he would come back, his advice to all Muslims was not to show up unannounced at your house. Let the wife know, let the family know that I'm going to be coming back and I'm going to not, it's not as if you are living in fear that what's happening when I'm gone, how is my wife behaving? And it was something that really made me, very impressed with the fact that he said when he would come back, he would stop outside the city, let everybody at home know that he's here. And he had full confidence in his family, in his wife, and he advised Muslims to do the same thing. And this is so missing, I think, in much of the discussion that happens in a so-called free society. I think I am freer knowing that my wife has full confidence in me, and by grace of God, I have full confidence in her. And this has to be felt, to be realized how important that is for the peace. When I go out, I'm comfortable, and when she goes out or when she's at home, she's totally comfortable. And we can put all of this aside and actually conduct the rest of our life in a very, very, very easy way.
And I think that's in direct distinction to what unfortunately is going on in the society around us. I mean, the statistics are pretty clear that adultery and cheating in marriage is rampant among men and women. And when you have that in a society and then you kind of question your own marriage and your own relationship with your husband or wife, it completely destroys your sense of peace of mind, peace of heart, kind of going forward. So unless you can really, and I think religion is a perfect avenue for giving some of those restrictions, which may seem like restrictions to someone. However, they're simply meant to be of benefit to the peace of mind and heart of a person.
And from that standpoint, what you alluded to as potential restrictions actually are freeing. They're liberating because they allow you to not have to worry about it and therefore to enjoy the benefits of the covenant all the more.
A lot of people say this thing about Islam, that it's so many rules, so many regulations, and I'm glad you brought that up. And it's pointed out as being essentially nonsense, especially in liberal study classes in the universities and whatnot, that look at religion, it does this, have to pray 5 times a day, have to do this, have to do that, fast during this month of fasting and so on. And yet, when we look at our real life, everybody drives on the same side of the road and nobody thinks this is a restriction. Would it be not so nice? Have you ever heard anybody say, it would be nice, it would be so free for us to every now and then go on to the left and drive that? And this is something that is not just...
I was in a cab once where the driver did that. It was very upsetting.
Yeah, and that's always something to look out for. We have a question or comment from the audience.
You guys mentioned a great comment about the number of people living alone or adultery and stuff like that. Some of the estimates suggest that the numbers in New York City is as high as 50% of the people are unmarried. So that's every other person living in a house is unmarried. So my question towards Reverend would be, you're from New York City and you're involved in the church here and in the Queens area especially. What is the church doing towards tackling that those numbers, and how successful has been the the initiatives taken by the church?
I can't really see that there's an initiative directly on point to that, but I think unpacking the statistics might be helpful because you need to differentiate between children and youth who are likely not to be married and senior citizens who might have been widowed or are widowers. So they contribute to that 50% population. But a place like New York is a magnet, especially for young people, college graduates, recent graduates, young adults who are coming to begin their careers. And I don't know what the number is now, but the average age of marriage has been rising over the decades. I suspect it's up somewhere in the late 20s right now, if it's not even into the 30s. And so that all contributes to it. So I'm not terribly worried about a 50% single population in a place like New York City. If that were to be true across the midlife demographic, then I think it would be very troubling. But I think the more problematic issue that we're facing is that of divorce. The fact that there have been marriages and then the marriage breaks up and then maybe remarried and remarried after that. So back a century and a half ago, largely as a case, I believe, of religious discrimination and persecution, as the Mormons were driven out of one state and another and set up in Utah, they were forced by the government to give up their belief in polygamy in order for Utah to become a state. And Reynolds v. U.S. was a case decided by the Supreme Court in the 1870s, I believe, which basically said it was perfectly legal for the government to forbid polygamy. And so I don't know that this would have created a solution, but now what we've got is a state of serial polygamy. We don't have 4 or 5 wives at one time, we just have them one right after the other. And I don't think that's any more healthy. And I'm not making a case for polygamy particularly, but what I'm saying is that we've got to get our focus. And one of the serious problems is the sexual attitudes that have grown up in this country, and I'm not quite sure why they have grown in the way they have, but on the one hand to say, sex is bad, and then to turn this into a multi-billion-dollar commercial industry, in various ways, pornography obviously, but in other ways where, sex is kind of pushed in our face by television, by movies, and then to expect people are going to remain faithful. I mean, it almost is a tempting one to go out on the edge and forego anything that's reasonable in relationship building.
And Reverend, you mentioned that the age that people are getting married at is rising. And before the show we were talking about how if you went to South America, you'll see people who are married at 15, 16. Why do we see such a vast difference between North America and South America? Why is it that on MTV and on other cable shows we'll see a show called 16 and Pregnant and find that to be ridiculous, whereas in Guatemala, for example, that could be the norm?
Let me just, I think we were discussing Guatemala, and I've been to many Central American and South American countries, and there you will see very often a girl who may be 15, 14, maybe younger, and she has a baby in her lap or on her back, and you would think that it may be her sister. And actually, when you inquire, you find out it's her second baby. And this is something that, as far as I've understood, over there, I think I find much more honesty in the approach that people have towards the way that they live. There isn't any taboo in the sense of a child, here we would refer to as a child, and yet she's in a relationship with her husband, who is the father of those 2 children, and they are all 4 having to strive very hard, and the economic circumstances are such that the children, when they are 3 or 4 and just barely walking, they're already out peddling, matches and stuff like this in order for the family to survive. But coming to the question that you're asking, why in North America this funny, not funny actually, it's tragic, because there are many, many girls who are getting pregnant as a consequence of these promiscuous or, I mean, there are millions and millions and millions, if not billions of liaisons that are built every day by all of the free mixing of the boys and the girls, and everybody's looking, and maybe they are whistling and so on and so forth. But these liaisons lead to meetings. These meetings lead to intimate relationships. These intimate relationships lead to pregnancy and children and childbirth. And on the other hand, the society talks about the validity of the, one wife and the husband, and yet this is really a relationship on paper. You talked about serial marriages. I'm much more concerned than that. I think have defined a marriage as something which is written on a piece of paper, but many people, technically, as far as I'm concerned, have wives already, and they're not married. They have relationships which are conjugal relationships with each other, and it's not called a marriage. But is there a difference?
Well, an attorney might have a slightly better history of this, but my sense is that there had been a tradition in this country of so-called common law marriages, where people are living together, without benefit of a license or a ceremony, and that after a certain number of years in the states that recognize such, they acquired the same legal status as those who had gone through the more formal process. I think, to me, the whole issue of marriage is primarily the covenant, the agreement between the two people. When I counsel a couple who are about to be married, I tell them right up front, I said that, the common talk about saying, oh, there's Pastor so-and-so, he married us. No. You two are marrying each other. Yes. I'm the witness.
Right.
I'm the witness. And that's important to understand. And while I would affirm the usefulness and the importance of being married in the eyes of the church in terms of honoring the religious tradition and bringing with it the sense of religious covenant that goes with that, the fact of the relationship, however it's been created, is what it is. What has happened is that as we've become a more pervasively regulated society, now everything has to be done according to a certain prescribed order. I'm not saying this is necessarily good, but it's what's happened. And this affects us in so many areas of life. In colonial times, it was the churches and the synagogues, the religious communities that dealt with marriage. If someone wanted to be married, they saw their pastor, priest, rabbi, a couple of imams, I guess, in the United States during that period. And the marriage was recorded in the records of that religious congregation. Somewhere after the Revolution and the Constitutional Convention, and we became a nation as opposed to several separate colonies, and I suspect it was because of record-keeping needs. There were too many fires in churches that destroyed records. Benjamin Franklin hadn't quite developed his lightning rod to prevent those kinds of church fires. So the government took over the whole recording of marriages and the record keeping of it, and then moved even further to say, okay, you cannot be married unless you've come to us and asked for permission in the form of a license.
So we've had a great discussion so far on the current issues facing marriage, how to approach marriage itself for the first time or for the second time. In the next part, we're going to discuss a little bit more about polygamy, some more traditional marriages that we might not know about, and ultimately how Islam and how religion really feels about marriage. So stay tuned.
An interlingual channel promoting interfaith dialogue, worldwide, live and interactive, on satellite television and the internet. This is MTA International.
The Review of Religions is one of the longest-running religious magazines. In print since 1902, it continues to play an important role in presenting the noble teachings of Islam, reflecting its rational, harmonious, and inspiring nature. It features articles and viewpoints on different religions, making religion and religious philosophy accessible to a wider readership. The Review of Religions was founded by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, peace be upon him, who claimed on the basis of divine revelation that he was the promised Messiah and Mahdi, whose advent had been foretold by the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and by the scriptures of other faiths. The annual subscription of this unique and enlightening magazine is just £15 per year or $30. To receive your copy of the Review of Religions, visit our website at www.reviewofreligions.org, where you can browse past issues and subscribe online, or contact us by email to info@reviewofreligions.org. The Review of Religions, a unique magazine of religious thought.
Welcome back to Real Talk USA, where we're talking about marriage. And now let's take it to the question of what is a traditional marriage? We've heard a lot of politicians, as this is an election year, talking about traditional marriage. What is that?
Traditional marriage. Marriage between a man and a woman, and one which is entered into by the free consent of the two. And in many religions, including Islam, which allows for the husband to have more than one wife. And again, with the consent of both the husband and the wives, for the purpose essentially of fulfilling their religious duties to God, as well as allowing them to live chaste lives and not have to indulge in the satisfaction of their carnal pleasures outside of this relationship.
Now I want to take it to the audience. What do you think?
A lot of the marriages in our society in the United States, they start off with based on the physical attraction, premarital relationships, and then when people realize they end up getting married, and then afterwards this healthy relationships ends up in divorce. So the divorce rate is pretty high in our country, in our society. So what can we do from the religious perspective, like from Islamic perspective or from the church perspective, to create an awareness and pass on those values that nurtures this relationship into the healthy mode, because the kids that are born afterwards, they suffer a lot. You know, the parents been going through divorces over and over, and then in another relationship, and that ends up being in divorce again. So that's a common practice in our society. So what would be your thoughts on this issue?
But then again, like people who don't even know each other, they get arranged marriage, and in our society, in our culture, it happens a lot, and they're living lives that they don't even want. And I've seen that a lot back in Pakistan when I was living there. There's a lot of females who are even scared to speak up, and they're living this life secretively, like they're getting beaten sometimes. And I think they should know each other before they even marry, because if you don't even know the person, it's more likely that it's going to be unsuccessful.
Now, do you think these arranged marriages that happen in Pakistan, do you think, or do you know, was there any interaction before they got married, or was it just you two are getting married?
Yeah, pretty much. The arranged marriages, like I said, that they don't even know each other, and they get arranged marriage. Most marriages are like that in Pakistan, and they end up as disasters. I mean, they might not get divorced, which is the way we look at it. If it's divorced, then it's a disaster, but it's a disaster in itself. If the wife is not happy, the husband's not happy, whichever one is not happy, and then it affects the children, and as they grow up, they tend to be like, they're affected by it because that was their childhood. They see their parents fighting all the time, and then like sometimes the dad leaves, sometimes the mom leaves, and then they come back after a few days or a few years. So that affects the children really like in a negative way. So I think there should be some type of interaction before you get married, because then it's like you're marrying a stranger.
So we have two interesting points. Almost you could say they're very diverse and on opposite ends. One is saying that if there's too much premarital relation going on, that could lead to a divorce. And then could be a divorce if there's not enough interaction before the marriage. So what do you think about that?
Just coming back to the first question, one of the interesting things about Islamic teachings, I always find mentioned that, you know, in Islam, the Holy Quran doesn't say do not commit adultery. It says don't even approach adultery. Meaning, if you don't want to go to Las Vegas, don't start driving on the road, you know, the I-5 from LA going north. But if you do start driving on it, don't expect that you're not going to get to Las Vegas. You know, so I think addressing your question first, how can we become successful in having a lower divorce rate in the United States, in the society in which we live? I think we have to have an appreciation of what marriage brings, a marriage with fidelity, a marriage that has a meaning. Yes, physical attraction is very important, but it's a very transitory kind of a thing. You know, after 10 years, 5 years, yesterday or the day before I was talking to somebody, and he was saying very amusingly that, you know, a second marriage, and after the first year, the fun of it is all gone. And then afterwards, he was reflecting, and he said, you know, no, it's not 1 year, it's about a month. So the statement really is that if the two people who decide to get married for the wrong reasons, you have to try and correct that. And what Islam does is promote a living style that enables people who get into marriage to get into marriage for the reasons that will last. But coming to your question, physical attraction and a relationship and some kind of an understanding between the two who are going to get married is essential. So I think this word arranged, it has a lot of different connotations. There's the arranged, where the arranged is something which is done at birth maybe, which is done without any input from the two who are going to get married. And there is the arranged, which some people call facilitated, which means that the persons are involved in the decision making. They are not getting married for the sake of just having a month or a year of fun, but they're getting into a marriage which is going to be designed to enable them to live chaste lives, number one, to live lives which are going to be able to bring a progeny which is going to be well looked after. The children are going to be loved and wanted, and not what they call consequences of a night on the town and so on. So I think the balance has to be struck, and religion has a role to play in that, and your spiritual development and all. But you know, this discussion will go again into the thing which is to do with the comment that Dr. Ahmed made at the beginning, that half of faith's requirements are fulfilled by getting married, because the love of God, the worship of God, and all of those things come into this discussion, which enables people to restrict and live a life which is chaste life, which is a very difficult thing in current circumstances.
Well, I think, kind of taking the two questions together, clearly the affirmation that any kind of divorce or breakup of marriage, it does have a very deleterious effect on the children. And so that's something to be avoided. I do think that the outside cultural norms and expectations of the larger society play a lot on which is going to be more successful or less successful. And historically, in those countries or those societies where there were arranged marriages, I suspect that people expecting that that's what was going to happen, moved into that. There were some that weren't successful, to be sure, but there were many that were successful. Now, there's probably no place on this planet that's not affected by media, television, et cetera. And I suspect that America's throwing more than its weight into that media pool around the nation. And with that, the highly sexualized programming and so forth is there. And so what you've got is a society that is not affirming marriage or fidelity, but a society that is doing exactly the opposite. So it's a very uphill battle in going forward. I think that's where our problem is dealing with this larger society that just simply is not just failing to affirm, but is actively seeking to destroy a meaningful sense of covenant.
Reverend, and how quickly we have come to this. Mm-hmm. I'm not as old as perhaps I look, but I still remember, and certainly we've seen probably movies where you see in the Western society a boy and a girl who are not married to each other being chaperoned. Mm-hmm. They are being introduced to each other, and there is a chaperone. There is a person from the girl side who is sitting in between them or behind them, and they go out on this carriage and they go out for, and they get to know each other, they get to talk to each other, they get to see each other, they get to find out a little bit more and become acquainted, and then a marriage takes place. And there is somehow, an impression created in modern society that this is, backward, or this is something very primitive. And yet, those were the kind of marriages that lasted a lifetime. You saw the couple, 100 years old, and they're still very much in love with each other.
And I think, though, the support of the extended family was important there, which is something I'd mentioned earlier, that moving to this nuclear family, which is driven by corporate America, people are uprooted every few years and shipped to another city by their business, and so you no longer have the extended connection in a meaningful, localized way with other members of your family. And so now you really are kind of isolated and alone, and any kind of a problem becomes a greater problem than it might otherwise have been, if the grandparents were around the council, et cetera. And to, take some of the stress. I mean, sometimes, particularly with younger couples with children, that can be very stressful. Their life experience doesn't give them the opportunity to know how best to deal with a small child that just simply won't cooperate and is screaming all the time. Whereas the older parents and grandparents, will say, okay, let me take care of that, and you go and do something else for a while. And that takes stress off. You mentioned about the attraction, though, and I do think that certainly in Western society, attraction has become the door for marriage. But if that's the only purpose or the only thing that's there at the beginning, it's a very weak foundation. We have come to use expressions in common life like, oh, we fell in love, or it was love at first sight. And of course, if you unpack that expression, if you decided to get married because you, quote, fell in love, as though there was some external force coming down and acting upon you and just caused you to lose your balance, and you fell into each other's arms with nothing that you did on your own behalf, then you can equally as well and without any responsibility fall out of love. Spontaneously.
And it's very important to keep in mind that if you're falling, no matter if it's in love or in real life, someone's going to get bruised.
Yeah.
So it's something that you always have to watch out for.
Good metaphor.
And now America as a Christian society, well, majority of America being a Christian society, why is it that what in the Bible we'll see as a lot of polygamy in many of the stories, why has that been whittled down to one man, one woman?
I think it's just simply what the cultural tradition has done over the centuries, and probably coming out of Europe, because I believe this had happened in Europe long before the settlement in the United States or in the colonies here in America. Christianity, in terms of the biblical tradition in the New Testament, really does not speak of polygamy. I mean, all of the polygamous references are in the so-called Old Testament. And the startup of Christianity, really, Paul writes about, if you're not married now, don't get married. And all of this was predicated on the notion that the world was going to come abruptly to an end within the lifetime of the people that were then living. Obviously, that did not happen. And so for the long haul, things had to be kind of reestablished. But I believe that it was a cultural issue, and with no particular Christian affinity toward polygamy from the Old Testament. So there was not a strong basis of that. And so when the Mormons kind of resurrected that notion back in the 19th century, it became as a startling affront to mainstream Christianity, and the Protestant majority in the country just rose up in anger. Part of it was because they disliked the Mormon testimony, but they also focused on this one practice. And so I think that's more social than theological.
Now, Ahmed, what do you think? Do you think society today, especially in America, could benefit from polygamy?
I think, polygamy is very misunderstood, especially how it is laid out in Islam. And certainly, when one kind of dramatizes polygamy, in the way that it's been dramatized in the Western world now, you naturally get a very negative view of it. But my understanding is that in Islam, there are very specific, limitations to the practice of polygamy. And the first and most important restriction is that you have to actually be able to treat all of your wives perfectly equally. And the burden is placed on the man for doing that. And me having one wife right now, I could not see how you could do that between 2 or 3 or 4 women. Certainly some men may be able to do so. So I think that's kind of the crux of the issue. Can a person actually practice complete equality between several wives? Second, you have to look at what's the alternative. In certain instances that societies are thrust into, polygamy may actually be the better of the 2 alternatives. For example, a war-stricken society where the men's population has significantly dwindled down compared to the women in that society. What are the women supposed to do? The unmarried women. Are they supposed to try to, covet adulterous affairs with the men? There has to be some alternative to simply the majority of the women going unmarried in a society. It's just not tenable as far as I can see, and from my view, that's kind of how Islam approaches it. That in certain instances, the alternatives to polygamy are worse than actually, practicing polygamy.
I think in the last segment, when we were talking about marriage and we were wondering how the Western world came to the state in which it is today, much had to do with the First and the Second World War. After those world wars, millions of men were disappeared from the scene. They were killed in the conflict, literally, and there were this excess of women compared to men, and it did lead to situations where hundreds of thousands of women were left no alternative in the marriageable segment of their age, ending up essentially causing and creating this havoc. So the statement really is, and I think you're absolutely right, in how Islam has laid out the subject of polygamy is not as a duty, perhaps, for a man to create a much better situation for him in paradise, which I think is somewhat of what the philosophy of Mormonism is. It's more of a situation of dealing with the real situation in the society in which we live. And remember, the purpose of the faith is to make our life easy and create peace and harmony in the society. So if you have hundreds of thousands of women who can never have ever the prospect of being able to be married and fulfill their desire to have children and so on, what else are they going to do? And we have seen, as I said, in the West, what happened as a consequence of those 2 world wars. So limiting the number of wives to 4 and putting on some conditions that you should try and do your best to treat them equally is the setting, but it is an exception. In the world, as far as I have studied numbers, I don't think in most stable societies there are more than essentially 1. There are slightly larger number of women than men, but essentially 1. You can't have a society in which you're going to have every man having 4 wives. There's just not that many women around.
So polygamy could actually even combat promiscuity, which is something that can, ruin a marriage. So polygamy would be the thing that would control that, rather if it's legitimized and legalized. Tahir, you have a comment, question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So you said that after World War I and World War II, there was a large number of women compared to men. But today we're seeing that because of China's one-child policy, and also in India, where they find out the sex of the baby before it's born. So if it's a girl, they abort the baby, and if it's a boy, they let the mother give birth to the boy. So the number of men has increased tremendously compared to women. In China, I think they're saying 1 to 4, or maybe the number is higher or a little lower. So with the flip of the coin, is it okay for a woman to have more than one husband then?
I think the statement really is, I remember once this was asked of a very distinguished jurist in Islam, Hazrat Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan Sahib, who was the head of the International Court of Justice for many years, as well as led one of the General Assembly in the United Nations. His answer was try and imagine that and what the consequences of it would be in terms of the survivability of the other husband perhaps, or how many of them would survive. But I think that question is very, what would you call it, hypothetical. The fact of the matter is that those societies in which the rate at which, the number of children who are being born and they are not, in the almost 1-by-1 ratio, those societies surviving any lengthy period of time, on the scale of number of generations is very, very questionable. In fact, if you don't have this ratio of, number of men and women being maintained at the 1-to-1, these societies have a real strong danger of going out of existence in a matter of a few generations. So I think it's an academic question, but one answer is that it's very likely that one husband will do a great deal of damage to the other, and the second is that I think in terms of longevity of such societies, they're in great danger of not continuing to exist for a very long period of time.
We're in the final minutes of the show. If we could have some closing thoughts from our esteemed panelists.
Well, I mean, I think we've had a really good, enlightening discussion. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience members have learned a lot, and I think this is such an important topic. Those who haven't been married yet, you'll experience the wonderful aspects of marriage and the trials and tribulations. And just coming back to what I had mentioned before, if half of religion is in marriage, there is a lot more in your life that you still, have to explore after you get married. So, for me, it's been an amazing experience. I just recently had a child, baby daughter girl, who just is 5 weeks old. And that's where I think the miracle of marriage really comes through, where you can actually see and hold another life, another being. And when they say that the purpose of marriage is to produce a child, even though it might not be completely true, it certainly is true when you're holding that baby, that precious baby in your hands. So I think we've had a great discussion, and I look forward to hearing more from the panelists.
Well, and picking up on that theme, certainly when you look at your child as he or she grows, through age 3, 4, 5, 6, and being able to see the world through the eyes of the child, is a marvelous experience for any person. And marriage, I think, is going to be with us. I don't think it's going to die. It obviously is changing, and I think it has always been subject to the vicissitudes of the culture in which it exists. One comment I would make in terms of the biblical traditions as to the prohibitions on gay marriage, etc. I do think that a lot of biblical, and I won't speak to the Quran, that's not my bailiwick, but in terms of the Old and New Testaments, these arose at a certain time in history, in a certain culture. And I suspect that Holy Scripture generally comes in that fashion. Were we to assume, or are we to assume, that that is a word then laid down once, is never going to be altered as cultures change, as times change, etc. And the other side of it, which I think theologically is a more testing emphasis, is does this mean that we believe that God stopped speaking at that past time in history and is no longer speaking now? I find that a very troubling theological premise. Obviously, one needs to be cautious about what accepts out of contemporary thought as being that of the divine. But there needs to be some mechanism, as there was, frankly, in so-called biblical times, where, prophets came and prophets went, and prophets had their day in the sun and sometimes got lost. And the communities settled on certain ones that they affirmed over a long period of time. And those are what has come to be the record in Scripture today.
The Reverend has opened up such a favorite topic of mine. But the nature that we see, the physical nature, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. And every day when we examine it, our understanding continues to increase. My look and my understanding of the Holy Quran and the divine scriptures is exactly the same. They are, we believe, the word of God in the Holy Quran, and to interpret it as being something which is once written and is crystal clear is to not understand that it is like the nature that God has created. We are understanding it every day more. There are some clear instructions there, and the clear instructions in the Holy Quran with regard to the purpose of human life stated is to know God. And I think through marriage, when we give birth to our children, when we see our children come in front of us, we begin to understand God as the creator, as provider, as sustainer, to a depth which we just can't get if you are not gone through that experience, as Dr. Ahmed was saying. So I think marriage and seeing your children grow and your grandchildren, as I have one now, is something that enables you to understand God that much more better, and thereby fulfill that purpose for which God created us, which is to get to know Him better. So I think this is really some in essence of what marriage is all about.
So we had a great discussion today here at Real Talk USA on marriage and its current issues, and really the whole history of marriage, how it culminates today, and how it can benefit society tomorrow. The safety and security of society is guarded by the institution of marriage, and that is because the children have great models in their lives, no matter what your religion is. So thank you to the audience for being here. Thank you to our panelists. Be sure to visit our website, connect with us on Twitter, and send us your emails, all the details which are at the bottom of your screen. We love connecting with our audience, and we love to hear from you. But until next time, this is Real Talk USA.